Hello, my name is Jeremy Barnes, and today I'm going to do a review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And it will be non-spoiler for the first part, but then I'll go into my spoiler talk at the end of the video. So I'm just going to break it down. Uh, just my overall thoughts first. I fucking love the shit out of this movie. Um, it is like top tier Spider-Man movies for me, and it might even be my number one. I don't want to commit to that quite yet. I have seen the movie a few times now, so it does hold up on rewatches. But I don't know if I'm quite ready to say it is my favorite. Before, my favorite was Tobey Maguire's original Spider-Man movie from 2002. So for me, these two are kind of like neck and neck with each other. And it could go either way in terms of which one is my favorite. I kind of do want to say this one is, but just for like nostalgia reasons, I kind of want to keep Spider-Man as my number one. But this one is really fucking good. Definitely better than Into the Spider-Verse, which for me, although I really liked it a lot, I think it was like probably my third favorite before this one came out. Um, I did think it was a little bit overrated, and yeah, I think this one just blows that one out of the water. So the first like section that I'm gonna talk about in terms of Across the Spider Verse is the story, which was great. And this was one thing that was great about both movies. I really like how they focus on Miles and his journey. Um, but here, it's a story about agency and writing your own story, your own destiny. And Miles is actually not the only protagonist in this movie. There's actually two. Um, Gwen is the secondary protagonist, and I would say this is actually more so her movie than it is Miles's, because she has a more complete arc compared to him in this movie. The movie does end on a huge cliffhanger, so if you aren't prepared for that and you haven't seen the movie yet, you're seeing my review. Here's your indicator, just to keep your mind open to that. Um, but Gwen ends the movie with her kind of story wrapped up, whereas Miles's is like only halfway there for this batch of the story. Because the first movie is definitely its own thing, but then this is like a two-parter, Across the Spider-Verse, and then the third movie is going to be Beyond the Spider-Verse. Those two are connected in a similar way to Infinity War and Endgame were. But I feel like this second movie is even more of like an incomplete story than Infinity War was. So it is going to be a little bit of a different experience, I think. Um, and it definitely was for me, where I actually felt closure in Infinity War, but I didn't really feel that, especially the first time I watched this. After thinking about it as Gwen's movie, I think it does kind of work in that way, but it's still obviously there's like a lot left to be done. So there's no way you could kind of really take it as its own thing, without the eventual sequel that we're gonna get. But yeah, man, the story was really great with the themes, and we see that with both with Miles and Gwen. The thing about agency, and I think Miles fights more for his agency and kind of inspires Gwen throughout the course of the movie. Um, but I don't want to like give too much because I don't want to obviously give spoilers right now. So that's all I'm gonna say for now about that. The next section I'm going to talk about are the characters, which were all great in this movie, and I'm going to separate this into two parts: the returning characters from Into the Spider-Verse, and then the new characters that were introduced here. So obviously, since Miles was the protagonist of the first one, I'm going to start with him. Um, he is now my favorite Spider-Man of any version that I've seen. He has now surpassed Peter Parker for me as my favorite Spider-Man. And the reason for that is just because I relate to Miles a lot more. than I do Peter. Even though I obviously Peter will always be a goat. Um, and obviously you needed Peter to even have Miles, but Miles has definitely, I think, in this incarnation especially, in the Spider Verse series, has overtaken him in terms of just how cool he is, how relatable he is, and just how heroic he is. Um, which all of those things are Spider-Man. So I think he kind of epitomizes him for me. Um, this movie definitely did a lot to flesh out Miles's parents a lot more too, especially his mom, who didn't really get much to do in the first one. So Rio Morales, I think she had a great expansion here. We got to kind of, I feel like, know her a little bit more. She was more in the background here, but the animation really kind of delivers a performance, and then obviously the voice as well. Um, and yeah, she was awesome. And I actually like that it wasn't like one or the other. Like the first movie, it really focused on the male figures in Miles's life. So his dad had a more kind of direct arc with Miles in that one, but his mom was kind of off to the side in the background. Here, it doesn't just switch. I feel like Miles' mom gets a lot more to do, and she is more of a important character in this one. But we still get a lot from Jefferson Davis as well, also known in the movie as Lieutenant Morales. I guess he actually adopted his wife's name in the movie, um, and I feel like he still has a very very big and important role as well in this one. And he kind of ties in more to the plot side of it as well. But we got to see kind of his like insecurities as a father and just as a parent. And I think parenthood was another big theme in the movie in general. And we see that with some of the other characters as well. Um, but yeah, he was great. And then now I'm gonna talk about the secondary protagonist, who actually might be the primary protagonist, Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen. Um, she had a great arc in my opinion. She was kind of the heart of the movie in a lot of ways. I wouldn't say fully, but in a lot of ways. Minor spoiler if you care about this sort of thing. But we do begin the movie with her and end the movie with her. So it kind of ties up that arc really well. Book ended in the movie. And then we get to actually see her world and like find out more about her even before the events of Into the Spider Verse, which was really cool. Um, which includes her supporting characters. We get to see a little bit of her version of Peter Parker, and obviously her dad as well, Captain Stacy. And he was central to Gwen's story, and I feel like his arc in the movie alongside her was a very powerful part of the story. Um, and it was crazy to me what happened with them. But yeah, he was great as well, and like all the actors did a phenomenal job as their characters, including Captain Stacy. All right, and then now I'm going to talk about Peter B. Parker, the Spider-Man that mentored Miles in the first movie. I feel like he was great when he was there, but he was definitely minimized a lot from his role in Into the Spider-Verse. So don't be expecting to see much of him. And also the dynamic has kind of changed, and I kind of did miss the banter between him and Miles in this one. But hopefully we get to see more of that again in Beyond the Spider Verse, which I think is gonna kind of if everything goes as like I believe it can, um, I think it's gonna be a good closing chapter that kind of ties everything together really well. So I definitely hope to see more of him and Miles again together in that movie. But as we saw in the trailers, Peter B. Parker and Mary Jane actually had a baby, Mayday Parker, and she was amazing in the movie. She was hilarious. There was a lot of good like physical comedy with her, and even like some interactions with some of the other characters that was really cool and maybe somewhat unexpected. But yeah, but she was great to see. And I had known about Mayday from the comics. She actually becomes Spider Girl, but I only knew her from that version, like that teenage version of her. So this was the first time that I actually got to see her as a baby, and that was kind of a cool new thing in the Spider-Man lore for me. Um, Mary Jane wasn't really a character in this one. I feel like she was definitely more prevalent in the first movie, but we do see her, and she is like cool for when she is there. But I wouldn't really classify her as her own character. Um, so now I'm going to talk about the new characters, starting with the big one that they teased at the end of Into the Spider Verse, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and he is a very interesting character in this movie because he serves as an antagonist in many ways, and a great one I think to Miles. But he's fleshed out as more than that, more of a flawed hero. So he's not just like a straight up bad guy in this movie. And I actually like kind of agree with a lot of the points that he's making, or just the way that he delivers his message is very like impactful. I think, which is why there are so many spider people on his side in the Spider Society, as we see when we get to that part of the movie. Um, so yeah, and Oscar Isaac's performance like just like knocked it out of the park for me. Um, I think if it was anybody else, it might not have worked as well. So the casting department really did an amazing job with this movie, especially with Miguel. Um, and I like how they made his like brooding because he is kind of a darker Spider-Man from a lot of other versions. More of a result of his running of the Spider Society and less as a result of the world that he lives in. And that's actually one of the negatives that I have about the movie is that Spider-Man 2099's world um, was not as like dystopian as I thought it would be, and like from what I know, it's supposed to be. But I'll talk more about that in the spoiler section. And like I said, the way that they kind of play it off of here is kind of more in line with the plot that they are going with in the movie, with the whole Spider Society and the Spider Verse sort of thing. So it kind of makes sense, I think, the way that they did it. So it's kind of a minor nitpick, I think, in the grand scheme of things. And then the next character that we see that is introduced here is Jess Drew, a version of Spider Woman, and an alternate take on Jessica Drew from the comics. And I feel like she was a great new take, and Issa Rae's performance definitely, I think, had the most to do with how liked she probably will be. Um, but I feel like she was kind of underused, so we just don't see enough of her for her to make like a huge impression on me, and that's kind of why I do credit Issa Rae for the engagement that I had with that character specifically. Um, and then the first like new world that we go to in this movie is the first is what we saw in the first trailer for the movie, I believe, which is Spider-Man India's world, and his name is Pavitra Prabhakar, and he was fucking awesome and extremely funny, and yeah, like he his personality is just like crazy, um, and like I would just love to be this guy's friend. Um, I think he kind of seemed a bit of like a younger Spider-Man. He still had that youthful quality to him. Um, and I could speak more on that when we get to the spoiler section too, on kind of why I think that is. But in a kind of like almost back to back with him, and then the next Spider-Man that we see is Hobie Brown, Spider Punk, and he was a total fucking badass. And I think he's without a doubt my favorite new Spider-Man or Spider-Person in this movie because he was just a badass. And I didn't even expect, like, I don't know, I didn't really have expectations really going into this one, but I definitely didn't expect for him to like blow me away like how he did. Cause he was just fucking cool. Like, and they even talk about it in the movie. Like Miles finds him extremely cool as well, and I feel like he went into the relationship kind of not really wanting to think he was cool, but he just fucking was cool, and you can't be mad at him. So I thought that was really cool, and they actually have a cool relationship, I think, as well. In the movie that I also helped gets more fleshed out in the next one. And then now, as for like the actual antagonist of the movie, the bad guy, we have Dr. Jonathan Owen as the Spot, and he's a character that I did see in the '90s animated series, but he's definitely used way better here, and he was a really great character because in the beginning he was fucking hilarious because he is kind of like a jokey villain in the comics just because of his powers being so weird. How he's literally just like he's called the Spot because he has spots on his body that are like portals where he could like move through space. And then they kind of upgrade him here to be like a multiversal level being where he doesn't only move through space but also like different entire dimensions or universes. And throughout the movie he kind of like upgrades himself, and by the end he becomes like super menacing, and like I was actually like fucking terrified of him by then. So like both sides of him I think work super fucking well, and I don't even know how the spider people can even deal with him with what we see he's capable of. But yeah, he was a great villain. Um, and then I have like one other kind of like very minor Spider-Man that I am gonna talk about as well, just because they gave him a poster, which is Ben Riley, who in the comics is a clone of Peter Parker, and he's called the Scarlet Spider. He's the one that wears the hoodie, the blue hoodie, and then like the red under part that have no like webs on them. And I like know somewhat about him, not like too much, but I am very familiar with him. And you know, he's a lot of people's fan favorites. It might just be the costume, but I think people actually do like his character as well. And in this movie, he was the one I think disappointing Spider-Man because they kind of dumbed him down a lot, and he's used more for laughs than anything else. So although I did think it was somewhat kind of funny the way that they did use him, um, I was a little bit disappointed with his depiction in the movie. But yeah, those are all the spider people I'm going to talk about and the characters in general for this one. The next section I'm going to talk about is the action, and I'm going to just go through each of the like action sequences in the movie. And for me, I don't know why, but it's kind of hard to judge action in animation. Like I don't really think about it the same way as I do in a live action movie. Just because I guess the entire movie is like drawn, and there is like kind of an element of action in the animation that in a movie it's a whole kind of different thing. Like the character scenes are very kind of distinct from the action a lot of times. But anyway, here in this one, the first like major action sequence is with the vulture, and it's where we see the introduction of Miguel and Jessica Drew, and I thought that was fucking awesome. Uh, Vulture's always actually been a pretty cool villain in the movies and like anything outside of the comics. I think for me, in the comics, like especially the early ones that I actually did read, he was a really goofy character. Just like the whole concept of him, he's like an old man who tries to like rob banks and stuff for money, and then like it just doesn't make sense for him to even stand a chance against Spider-Man with Spider-Man's powers. But in the other versions that I've seen, like in the Spider-Man video games, Shattered Dimensions especially, and this movie in the MCU, Vulture has always been kind of actually pretty cool. And this one definitely continues with that aspect. And there's actually I think three Vultures in the Spider-Verse movies, both of them combined. But this is we only see one like up close, and he's from like a Renaissance sort of universe where it's all like sketches, like Leonardo da Vinci creations, and the whole art style of that was really cool. The functionality of it in a separate universe is really cool, and like the physics also kind of change depending on where he comes from and where he goes, and all of that was really cool. And like all of the little kind of notes in the movie, which they definitely have for him, are really cool as well. And just the design of him was badass. And because he comes from Leonardo da Vinci, he has like an Italian accent and like background, and yeah, it was just really cool. And Gwen's action was cool in the first movie, and that continues here. She's very acrobatic. Um, in the first one, she had like ballet shoes, so I don't know if she had like a dancing background or what. And and then when Miguel gets here, he has a lot of cool abilities with his like futuristic tech. One of which is like a cool like laser system that I just seen somebody else state in another video. It's kind of similar to um, the Omega beams from Darkseid in the DC universe, and that actually is a good comparison I think to make. And then Jessica Drew, she was cool with her fucking bike. She rides a motorcycle, and yeah, she was kicking ass in there. Um, so yeah, all of that was really cool, and we get to see some of their teamwork, all three of them together in that scene. And then the next one is back in Miles's world, where he fights the Spot for the first time. And I thought that fight was pretty cool with the Spot's abilities, showcasing them. And it was also hilarious with the banter back and forth between him and Miles. And Miles is just like making fun of him and stuff. And he wants to be taken serious, which was kind of his arc in the movie. Kind of similar to Miles's arc in kind of both movies, I think. In the first one, he was learning barely, and this one, he's already been Spider-Man for at least a year. I think maybe a couple years. I'm not sure. Um, I think just not. I think just a year. But a lot has changed. A lot does change for teenagers that age in a year. So he's a little bit more experienced here. Um, and just the way all that plays out is really cool, I think. Um, and then the next one is when we meet Spider-Man India and his universe, which is called Mumbai, which is a combination of Mumbai and Manhattan. So it's the Indian big city of Mumbai, and obviously Spider-Man's New York roots of Manhattan. Um, and that scene was really cool. We got another kind of cool team up scene in that one with Miles, Gwen, Paviter, and Hobie. And yeah, that one was crazy. That one was like the first kind of like big action sequence where I was like, holy shit, like on the scale of a live action movie, kind of. And I didn't even know how the hell they were gonna save everybody in that scene. But the way that they do it is really cool. Um, and that's kind of where the movie kind of shifts to more the plot side of things, which kind of elevates it a little bit. Um, and after that, we go to Miguel's world, which is Earth 928, and there's actually kind of two separate action sequences I think that happens there. The first one is in the lobby where we see in the trailers all the spider people are chasing Miles. Um, and that one was kind of crazy, just with like how many spider people they are, and that was like a cool moment of like having a bunch of Easter eggs and stuff with all the spider people, and I actually just like kind of done a breakdown with like research and seeing other videos and stuff about like a lot of the spider people that are there. And there's a lot of cool ones too that I'll talk more about in the spoiler part of my review. Um, but yeah, that part was crazy. It was more fun I think than anything else, but it was definitely cool, and it's just crazy at like how many Spider people they actually animated. Um, but then after that we see the other part that also was in the trailers, which was Miles versus Miguel on a train that kind of goes up. I don't know where exactly it's going. Maybe it's a train to the moon. I heard somebody say. I don't know if that's just like their headcanon about it, or if that's actually something from the comics. But that one was kind of more intense and personal, and that scene was crazy. Um, they kind of piggyback off of each other, the two Earth 928 action sequences. But that one, yeah, I was like, I actually like felt bad for Miles because Miguel is just like he's not holding back anything on him. But the way that it ends is really badass, and another reason why Miles is my new favorite Spider-Man. The way he's able to get out of the situation is really cool. And then of course the next section I'm going to talk about is the animation itself, which in this movie was fucking breathtaking. And the first movie already did a lot to push animation forward, but I think this one definitely hits a whole new high in terms of what they can do and what they did do in the movie. And I'm gonna actually break down each of the separate universes that we see because each universe has its own style. Like we saw in the first movie with the characters that came from there, they retain their same look from each of the universes. Like Spider-Man Noir is completely black and white, um, and then Peter Porker was the most like cartoonish version of Spider-Man, and he also has like his own rules that cartoon characters do have. Like in this movie, it's actually named. Um, damn, I forgot what it's called. I think it's like Hammer Space or something like that, where it's like an infinite kind of void where you can get cartoon weapons and stuff, like Spider Ham's mallet in the first movie. So that was pretty cool. And then obviously Penny Parker and that one had the anime sort of style. Here, when we go to Gwen's universe, it's very dynamic, kind of like watercolor look to it, and I think that universe is actually my favorite universe visually, because of how dynamic it is, and the colors change with the character's mood. I think in the scenes, and it's just really like just gorgeous. I really like Gwen's costume too, like the color um, kind of wheel that they use. A lot of pinks, a lot of like light colors, like a light pink, light blues, um, and white. And yeah, it was just amazing to see. And then Mumbaten, Spider-Man India's universe, which is Earth 50101. I think was very cool. But the part that stood out the most to me about it was the music, where we actually get that Indian vibe. Um, and it's cool, like stuff that I didn't really notice myself watching the movie, but I found out later is that the kind of comic book text that appears, like whip and all the action words that appear, are also in an Indian written language. I don't know what language it is, but that's a really cool touch that they add in there. Um, and I would say his universe is a very kind of yellow, like that's kind of the color scheme. It's very yellowish, which goes really well with Spider-Man India because his costume is also, I think, similar colors as well. Um, but yeah, I think of all the new universes, his is my second favorite. Kind of goes in order, I think, from the way that we see them. Obviously, 2099s we see, which is Earth 928, and I feel like his was okay, but for me, like I mentioned earlier, it was a little bit too kind of like fancy and not dystopian enough. But we do get to see a kind of side of it that does look kind of dystopian, which is the lower level of it. Um, like as we go down, there's kind of like it's I don't know if it is an underground area, but it seems like an underground area where that part looks kind of more like a Blade Runner sort of aesthetic, whereas above it looks more like futuristic in a positive way. Um, and actually, his universe and Spider-Man India's universe are kind of similar in that they both kind of go up like forever. Like Miles is just falling and you think he's gonna hit the ground, but it just keeps going. And that's where the Mumbai side of it comes from. Like I think they got the tallest skyscraper in the world. Um, but um, there's another universe that we also see in the movie, but that gets into the spoiler part of it, so I'll tell you more about that one later. Now I'm going to talk about the music in the movie, which was a huge thing in the first one, definitely a huge thing in this one as well. Um, First thing I'm going to talk about is the Metro Boomin soundtrack. Uh, I feel like the way that it's used in the movie itself is fucking fire. But after like listening to the whole soundtrack just as its own project, I feel like it's pretty good. Definitely not as good as the one from the first movie. But there are some songs that I think stand out. Um, for me, in this one, the score stands out a lot more than the like pop culture soundtrack. Whereas in the first one, I think the soundtrack stood out more. Besides the Prowler's theme, here we get a lot of the similar sounds. But also 2099's theme is really fucking cool and also stands out. I don't think it stands out as much as the Prowlers, but it's pretty damn close. And here it's just fucking pulse pounding. Like all of the music in general definitely sets the mood for a lot of the scenes and adds a lot to the movie overall in terms of just the whole cohesive piece of art that it is. Um, but yeah, man, the score like fucking made me tense in scenes, and yeah, it was fucking amazing. And I actually, before I continue to the next part, I want to actually point out a few songs that I actually really like from both the soundtrack and the score. So the songs from the soundtrack that really stand out to me are Hummingbird, Self Love with Corey LeRae, and then from the score, the songs that stand out to me the most on there, Spider-Man 2099's theme, which is just called Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara. Um, Spot's theme is fucking crazy. I definitely think his second theme stands out more. But it's kind of crazy how it kind of he has a theme for each of the two sides of him. Spot Holes One, which is not the one that I like as much, even though it is a really good track on its own. But Spot Holes Two, which is kind of the more darker side of him, that one is cool. Um, so Spot's theme, 2099's theme, and Canon Event, that one is fucking crazy. That one stands out. And I'm gonna talk about that real soon as well, what that actually means. Um, I think I really like the Go Home machine as well, which is something in 2099's universe that sends a being to their home universe. The Anomaly was really cool, and just the Across the Spider Verse theme, which there's one that starts the movie and then the one that ends the movie, and I think the one that ends the movie definitely hits a lot harder. That one is has like a subtitle called "Start a Band," but the title is just "Across the Spider Verse" and then parentheses "Start a Band." Those ones are all really fucking cool. Um, so if I was to give the movie a rating out of 10, it would be a 10 out of 10. Definitely my favorite movie of the year. One of my favorite movies. I think it is my number one favorite. But it's crazy. I actually have a favorite, two favorite movies that are animated, and then two so far that are live action. So like my top five, which are only four right now, are split kind of even. Like animation is crazy right now. I think it's the best that it's been in a long time, and probably due to Into the Spider Verse. So this movie definitely pushes it forward even more. Um, if you haven't seen it, go see it. If you haven't seen Elemental, that's my number two favorite movie of the year that is animated. Go see that one as well. Go see both of these movies if you haven't seen them yet in theaters. But now I'm going to talk about spoilers for Across the Spider Verse. So first, I'm going to talk about the stuff that I mentioned before, but I couldn't really go into too much detail on, um, which are first I'm going to talk about Captain Stacy and his relationship with Gwen. That shit was fucking crazy in the beginning of the movie when she runs out of web fluid and he kind of tracks her down and he's been like on her ass trying to get her for the death of Peter Parker in her universe, who was the Lizard. And that fucking intro was like heartbreaking, and that shit like hit in the very beginning of the movie, which was crazy to me. Um, but when he fucking pulls the gun on her and she doesn't want to like surrender, and he fucking shoots in the air like he's not playing around. So she shows him her identity, and he's like shocked. But then he still's gonna fucking arrest her. That shit was crazy to me. I was like, holy shit, what the fuck? And that's kind of where his arc kind of comes in and kind of mirrors Gwen's in some ways in the movie. Where her arc is basically like her being lost in the beginning, like after meeting Miles and like not really being able to make friends after Peter Parker's death, except for Miles, and she's kind of just in this like slump. She was in a band, but she quits, and then that shit happens to her. So she's just like, what the fuck am I supposed to do now? Like she's completely lost. And Jessica Drew wants to like basically adopt her into the Spider Society with Miguel O'Hara, and he allows it. So she joins him, and I think she's like, she found a new family with them. She's like really good friends with Hobie, and she admires Jessica Drew. Um, so she's like really believes in the cause that Miguel is fighting for, which is the safety of the entire multiverse, which he thinks will fall apart without his actions. And he's kind of fixing the mess that Kingpin made in the first movie with the collider, because everything that happened in that first movie is causing beings from random universes to get shot into different universes that are not their own, and any actions that they take has the possible effect of um, disrupting what he calls a canon event, which I'll talk more about later. So he thinks it's all on him. So she believes it, but when Miles is introduced to this concept, he's like, nah, like we can change things, save people who you say have to die, but also save the world as well. And I think that's where Miles kind of um, inspires Gwen to kind of come out of that. And she was always kind of hesitant to fully side with Miguel, but by the end of the movie, she completely breaks off for him and is there to support Miles. And she starts her own team, which is where that name comes from, Start a Band, and the song from the score. And that shit was really cool. She goes back to her home, and we find out that Captain Stacy is actually retired. He can't do his job no more because of just everything that has happened with Gwen. And that's what I mean by like they have kind of similar arcs that intertwine. Um, Now, the other thing that I want to talk about, I think, was Hobie. How the whole time he's just like basically pushing Miles to go against the grain, even though he's with the Spider Society. Um, and at the end, like at the end of the chase, or actually right before the chase, I think happens when Miles first breaks free from Miguel's grasp. He's like, I'm out. Like that's it. Everything I needed from this group, I've got. And I didn't even realize it really until the third time I saw the movie. But he was using the things that he was taking from the different places they were going through 2099's universe to make a new multiversal wrist device himself. And before he dipped out, he left the one that Miguel gave him there because it belongs to Miguel. But he made his own as well, which is what he was telling Miles to do. Because Miles was like all excited about it and shit, and he's like, "Why? Like just do your own thing." And that's what Miles ends up doing at the end, and that's the line that he says to Miguel, like, "Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing. I don't believe with what you're saying. I don't think that's the only way that we can go." And he's gonna try to show Miguel and prove it to him, and I hope he does it, but we'll see. I don't know. Um, Now the other universe that we visit in this movie is Earth 42, which is the universe that the spider that bit Miles in the first movie actually came from. And this is also something I didn't notice any time that I've watched that movie, Into the Spider Verse. But they explain it here, and it was in that movie. There's a lot of kind of hints that lead straight in from that one into this one. Um, but the spider actually did glitch in that movie, which was something that happened to any beings that aren't from that universe. Whenever you go into a new universe, you glitch, unless you have the watches that Miguel made for the Spider Society. He found a way to keep the atoms of a being stable, but that spider didn't come from that world, and it's revealed here, if you didn't already know from the first one, that Dr. Jonathan Owen, who worked for Alchemax, which was the company that Kingpin was kind of running in that movie to start the collider to bring his family from another universe to him. Um, he brought that spider from another universe, and it was supposed to bite somebody else in Earth 42, but it ended up biting Miles, which is where Miguel's kind of argument comes from. That he's like just giving to Miles at the end, brutally, like brutally honest with what he fucking thinks, that Miles doesn't fucking belong. Like he was never supposed to be Spider-Man, and because he is, he's threatening the entire multiverse, and he's trying to fix basically what he blames Miles for, on being an anomaly in the system. Um, and it's not Miles's fault. It's fucking Jonathan Owen's fault, or the Kingpin's fault from the first movie, for creating this whole mess in the first place, because it was he who fucking brought the spider in the first place. So if that didn't happen, then Miles wouldn't have gotten bit. It's not Miles' fault. He didn't fucking know. Like he didn't know anything really. He just tried to fix it at the end, and he did what he can to at least minimize the damage that could have been caused. Um, but we visit Earth 42 when Miles is trying to get back home after he leaps off, and gets away from Miguel. He uses the go home machine to try to go home, but it reads the host's DNA, and it reads actually the spider's DNA, not Miles's DNA. So it sends him to where the spider came from, which was Earth 42. And that place was fucking awesome. It gave me the dystopian vibe that I wanted from Miguel's world. But because we got it here, that's why I'm kind of giving Miguel's world a bit of a, I'm cutting it some slack. And this world was fucking very comic booky. The whole fucking aesthetic of it was really cool. It had more of like a dark, like kind of neon green sort of look. And I actually like how each universe has its own kind of color scheme that it goes with. I would say Miles's is kind of more like an orange tint. I don't know how I would describe Peter B. Parker's. It might be kind of similar to Miles's. I don't know if it has its own kind of color. Because I think we only really see it at night in this movie. Um, but otherwise, it might be just kind of a gray world. But man, Earth 42 was fucking cool, and they could do so much cool shit with it in the next one. They mentioned that there's a Sinister Six cartel, so it's actually like a legit fucking gang that basically runs everything, because there is no Spider-Man, there is no hero to stop all the bad guys in the world, because the spider that was supposed to create Spider-Man in this universe left before it bit him, and it was actually supposed to bite Miles from this universe, which that fucking twist was fucking crazy at the end of the movie. Um, Now I'm gonna get back to that later, but before I do, I'm gonna just kind of go into the spoilers, just kind of in order of the way that they happen in the movie. And the first big thing that was like crazy to me is that we see a depiction of the multiverse when Miguel is kind of showing Miles what's at stake. And we see a multiverse tree, which looked exactly like it does in the MCU, which we first saw in Loki. So that immediately like tied it to the MCU for me, um, especially because of a big cameo that we see in the movie. But then some of the fan service things that we see are a live action cameo first from Mrs. Chan from the Venom movies, where the Spot is first discovering that he can go into other universes, after a funny sequence where he kicks himself in the butt by like putting his foot through one of the holes which goes behind him, and then he kicks himself into another portal. Um, but then when we are in Miguel's universe, he's showing like they're kind of giving him a tour of the place, and we see a Prowler from a live action universe, and we got Donald Glover as Aaron Davis in the MCU. We see a live action Aaron Davis that is also played by Donald Glover. So I'm hoping he's a version that is that we're also going to see in the MCU in Tom Holland's next Spider-Man movie. But that fucking cameo was awesome because I've been waiting for the MCU to have uh, Donald Glover black back properly as Prowler. Because there were so many things that they set up in Spider-Man Homecoming, and that was one of them. That we haven't gotten any sort of resolution to yet. So this is like a taste of that, and I hope it's not the only thing that we see from him as Prowler. Like I said, I hope they bring him back in Spider-Man 4, and they could do it in a similar way to what they did in the first movie, Into the Spider-Verse, where he's like working for a bigger like crime boss like Kingpin or somebody else. Um, a lot of people are hoping for Kingpin because he's in the MCU now too, and we want that crossover with the more superhero side of it, between Daredevil and Spider-Man. Because so far we just saw their alter ego side, Peter Parker and um, Matt Murdock, and No Way Home. So I think that would be really cool if the Prowler is working for Kingpin and we see him in the next Spider-Man movie live action. Um, but then also Miguel tells Miles about canon events, which are essential and like core elements of every Spider-Man's journey. And for the one that is disrupted in Spider-Man India's world, Mumbai, it's the death of a captain that has some sort of close relation to somebody that Spider-Man loves. And for Paviter, it's Captain Singh, or I think he had a different title. Um, I don't know exactly what it was, but he was the father of Paviter's love, who was named I think Gayatri. I don't know how to say it exactly, but we see Captain Stacy's of a bunch of Peter Parker's Spider-Man lives, including Andrew Garfield's live-action Spider-Man, and that shit was another cool thing. Um, it was kind of weird because we saw that amongst like a bunch of like animated canon events, but I think it worked a lot better than the kind of Easter eggs that the Flash movie gave, because they used past footage, so it didn't like look weird because it wasn't like new footage shot to be in an animated universe. Um, but I feel like these live action Spider-Man cameos weren't as impactful as the Aaron Davis cameo because that was like something actually new, whereas here we were seeing stuff that we had already seen before. But it was cool that they at least acknowledged it. We also saw Tobey Maguire's Uncle Ben canon event of his death, and then we also see another cool cameo that I was really into, which was Spectacular Spider-Man, where we saw him experience his Captain Stacy's death, and that was really cool because it actually added to the lore of Spectacular Spider-Man, that cartoon, which is actually my favorite Spider-Man cartoon. Um, because we never actually saw that in any of those episodes. So here, this one was actually better, I think, than the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield stuff, because that was all past stuff that we see. But this actually added to it, which made sense that they were able to do that because it was animated, which kind of goes in line with the rest of the movie. But that was really cool, and those events must have happened after the end of the TV show. And it was cool for Josh Keaton to return as Spectacular Spider-Man, and he had two lines in here that was really cool. Um, and then we also got Insomniac Spider-Man, which was also cool, but he didn't really do anything. He just had one line. But it was kind of funny to see Genki, Miles' roommate, playing Insomniac Spider-Man 2, which is supposed to come out later this year in October. Um, so that was kind of like a weird kind of mending of the universes, which was crazy. But um, I did catch that the first time I watched it. We see the screen in like two different kind of moments. I noticed it the second time. I didn't really notice the first time, but it is Spider-Man 2 because we see Spider-Man in that game use the tentacles that he's gonna have in that game, and he didn't have in the proper story of the first one. Um, I think that little Easter egg was honestly cooler than the actual appearance of Insomniac Spider-Man. Um, but either way, it was still cool to see him, and I think he actually did cross over in the Spider-Verse event in the comics, so it makes sense that he would be there. Um, but as for the big stuff that is relevant to the movie and the story itself, the cliffhanger ending, man. Like I did not see it coming. Like I knew the movie was getting close to the end, but I didn't think it was actually the end when it fucking actually ended. I thought we were gonna see a whole like final battle against the Spot because originally the movie was actually called Across the Spider Verse Part One, Part Two, but then they changed it to be Across the Spider Verse and then Beyond the Spider Verse. They said like it was gonna be its own movie, so I was expecting something more like Infinity War, where that was its own movie. It was Thanos' movie, and then the sequel was more back to the Avengers, and they are kind of distinct things, even though they do connect in very important ways. But here, it was not really like that. It literally was a fucking cliffhanger. It ends even though it's not the end of the story. So I was just fucking shocked when it ended. I was like, what? There's no fucking way they're gonna end it right here. But like I said, I'm kind of more accepting of it now that I think about it as Gwen's movie. And we see at the end that she's changed her mind and she's going against Miguel to help Miles, and she was using the device that Hobie made um, for her to travel the multiverse because Miguel obviously kind of deactivated the one that he gave her. So she's using it to go to the other universes to recruit her own team. And she said like she joined the band, she quit, so she decided to make her own band. So what I'm gonna call the team that she's making is the Band of Spiders, which is a really cool lineup because it has like the best characters from both movies on it. So Gwen Stacy, obviously herself. From this one, Spider Punk, who's probably my like second favorite Spider-Man in these movies after Miles. Peter B. Parker's coming back because he just really wants what's best for Miles, even though he did kind of lost Miles's faith a little bit with by going against him and not telling him what was going on earlier. Spider-Man Noir, who's a fucking goat from the first one. Spider-Ham as well. Penny Parker, who we also saw in Miles's Spider Society, and it looks like she's been through some shit just like he has. Um, and the robot also has a more kind of like menacing look to it instead of like cute. Spider-Man India, he's gonna join. Which this one's actually gonna be kind of interesting. I'm kind of interested to see like his thinking behind it because he could blame Miles for what happened to his world, like Miguel does. Um, but I think maybe he just likes Miles enough to just side with them. They could be buddies. Peter B. Parker obviously also is bringing Mayday for some reason. She puts on her little fucking crochet mask, and then Spider Bite, who we only kind of saw very briefly in this movie, but she's the one that actually lets Miles get away because she's able to abort his trip to where he thinks is back home, but she chooses not to. Um, so there's something about, I guess, Miles that she kind of wants to side with him more, or maybe she was just never fully on board with Miguel's kind of mission. Um, or maybe he just inspired her to, step out of what's next. And then hopefully Miles is accepting of the team, and he does join them. But it's a cool ass team. Um, and yeah, man, I can't wait. But before I talk about like some of my predictions, or what I kind of want to happen, or what can happen, or what at least needs to be addressed in Beyond the Spider Verse, I'm gonna go back to talking about Earth 42. And I want to mention like when I figured out Miles was actually in the wrong universe, which was way later than I should have. But it was when Gwen stepped out and started talking to Miles' parents. Because the whole time, like, I should have pieced it together because she was outside of Miles' window. He was inside the room, and like his mom came in and they were talking, and they kept cutting back and forth between them. But it didn't seem like she was actually looking at anything. It just looked like she was looking for something to happen before she made any sort of move. But especially when she went in the room, I should have realized because Miles was in the room too, so there was no way that it was the same room because they were both in the same place but by themselves. But I didn't really fucking like, it didn't click until she actually left to go talk to Rio and Jefferson. Um, that was actually funny how both she and Genki called them by their first name to their face, which I would never do that. I don't know why the hell they did, but yeah, that was just crazy. And then when Prowler fucking walks out and the fucking music hits, that fucking good ass theme from the first movie, that shit was crazy. And then the fucking twist at the end with the Prowler, that shit was crazy. I knew Aaron Davis was not gonna be the Prowler in this universe, but I did not expect it to be Miles. I was telling my cousin who I saw it with the first time that in the original universe somebody else was the Prowler, and in 616 universe, and I didn't even remember or realize that it's actually Hobie Brown, who in this movie in his universe is Spider Punk. I didn't think about that, but I knew it was somebody else that was not Aaron Davis, so I was expecting it to be him. And it would have been interesting if it was like Hobie, but obviously for the story purposes, it's better that it is Miles because it is like a dark reflection of himself if things didn't happen the same way that it did for him. Um, and I didn't figure out that it was Miles until like right when he jumped down, but before he spoke to 1610 Miles, which is the main one. Um, but when I actually showed him, I was like, oh shit, that's fucking crazy. And his music actually, I think, kind of had a bit of the Prowler theme from the first movie, but also had a little bit more added to it to make it a unique theme. And it reminded me of Killmonger from Black Panther, how his music was very kind of hip hop focused, um, and like kind of very dark. But here, I feel like it had a bit of a Latin music mix into it. And Miles, this version of Miles from Earth 42, I think in general just has more Latino features to him. He has more of an accent, probably because he spoke like exclusively to his mom after his father died, which could have happened even earlier than it did for Earth 1610 Miles with his uncle. But we don't know that yet for sure. But either way, like even if it's just been a year since he's been dead, That could be enough to change his accent. But I think even his facial features also look more Latino to me as well. And that shit was just fucking cool. And I'm super excited to see what they do with that. And then, like, now, as for what they need to address in Beyond the Spider Verse, I know Miles is gonna get out because they had him like tied up to the punching bag in Aaron's apartment in the movie, which is a cool like reflection of what happened with Miles and Peter B. Parker in the first one. But because of what he taught him, look at the hands, not the mouth. Miles is gonna use that to get out of that situation, just like Peter got out of the situation that Miles put him in that movie. And I already know he's gonna get out because we saw his finger like zapping starting to zap the metal. So he's gonna explode it with his venom blast. And I noticed that actually barely the second time I watched the movie. But then we also have Miguel, who's still looking for Miles. He went to 1610 just like Gwen did. And Gwen kicked out Ben Riley, but we still had Spider Woman, Jess, and Miguel there. And I think he sent them to like other universes to look for him anywhere he can be. I don't know how long it's gonna actually take them to figure out where he went. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't take too long because like where the fuck else would he go? There's only a few places, but obviously when that happens, and then we saw in 1610, Spot actually came back at the end, and he's like ready to fucking exact his revenge on Miles by killing Jefferson. I don't know if he actually knows anything about Miles, like who his dad is. So I don't think he's actually gonna be attacking Jefferson like purposely, but because he's a police officer, obviously he's gonna be in the danger zone, and he's gonna get hit in the crossfire. And that scene when Spot was leveling up, and we saw like the fucking future and like mirror events of I think his name was Police Inspector Singh in Spider-Man India's universe, and Jefferson Davis in Miles's universe. How it was like reflections of the same thing. They're both saving a kid, and we're supposed to get killed in the process. But because Miles saved Police Inspector Singh in Spider-Man India's universe, that's why that canon event, a captain dying, was disrupted, and why that universe, Mumbattan, was starting to kind of fall apart. That shit was crazy. And then when we actually see it, like right after that, that was crazy. And then at the end, like right after Jefferson and Rio look out the window, is when Spot gets there. So they're gonna have to deal with that. And then Miles, yeah, it's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be like a bunch of forces all coming together. Miles is gonna have to deal with the other Miles and Uncle Aaron, get out of that situation, kind of convince him to try to let him go back, which he has no way to get back actually because he was glitching there. He doesn't have the watch, so he's either gonna have to wait for somebody else to come and get him. But if Gwen gets there first, he's gonna be fucking pissed at them because he was already kind of like upset with that breach of trust that they had against him. And then Miguel, if he gets there first, he's not gonna let him go home. So there's just a lot that they got to deal with, and it's gonna be crazy. I hope we see the Sinister Six cartel, see some other versions of the Sinister Six like we saw in the first movie, which I think the Spot was a better villain overall than the villains in the first movie were, but it was cooler I think seeing the Sinister Six in Into the Spider Verse than it was just having one villain here. Besides obviously the Vulture in the beginning. That's something that I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing in Beyond the Spider Verse, seeing some more villains also, in addition to stopping the spot, which I don't know how they're gonna do that. Um, and I expect it to take more of the movie than just like the beginning. I don't know how they're gonna do it though. So like I'm very curious to see what they do with it. Um, one quick thing that I did notice the third time I watched it is that in Gwen's universe there was actually Uncle Ben there too, because since Gwen was the one that got bit by the spider, Peter's whole story changed, and it seemed like he didn't actually lose Uncle Ben, because in one of the dinner scenes when Gwen, her dad, Peter, and May are having dinner together, I saw another person who I believe was Uncle Ben. I don't think they ever show him like close up or a good look at him for very long, but I'm pretty sure there was somebody else there that was supposed to be him. So that was kind of a cool thing that I noticed as well. Um, and yeah, man, I'm just excited. I don't know if there's anything else I really have to say, but man, I fucking love this movie. I can't wait to have it and like be able to pause it, break it down, fucking frame by frame. I'm definitely gonna do screen captures of it with all the beautiful paint-like imagery that they gave us in this one. And yeah, it's gonna be crazy. Um, like I said before, if you haven't seen it yet, or even if you have, go see it again. This weekend would be a good time to do that. Um, and I'm honestly just like proud of how successful animation is, because this movie was doing really fucking well. I think in the first weekend it outperformed, or maybe the first week, like full week, it already outperformed the first movie, which didn't do crazy numbers in terms of the box office, but it did win like that Oscar for best animated feature. And this one better win again, and maybe even some more awards as well. Um, but I'm happy that it's also successful commercially as well. And something I didn't mention before was that I didn't go into this movie with like huge expectations. I didn't really have any specific expectations. The only thing I expected was that it was gonna be good, but I didn't know how good it was gonna be. So I was fucking super pleased at how good it was. But now, because of how good it was, I have crazy high expectations for Beyond the Spider Verse, and I just hope they could fucking deliver. But I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.